I'm the Criminologist, and tonight I'm guiding you through two disturbing unsolved mysteries. Listen closely to every clue, every timeline, every contradiction. If you're new here, subscribe and stay with me to the very end. You might notice the detail everyone else missed. The murder of Tamara Lee Tygard takes place in Oklahoma and spans over 4 decades before her identification. On the morning of April 18, 1980, 2 fishermen making their way to their favorite fishing spot along the North Canadian River east of Jones, Oklahoma, approximately 20 miles east of Oklahoma City, made a grueling discovery. The nude body of a young woman lay on the riverbank, completely covered in a white powdery substance that investigators would later identify as quicklime. The victim appeared to be a white female, estimated between 18 and 25 years of age, standing approximately 5'7" inches tall and weighing between 115 to 120 pounds. She had light brown to blonde shoulder-length hair and a fair complexion with freckles on her face and upper torso. The most distinctive feature was a tattoo on her left breast depicting a red heart outlined in blue with a scroll-like line going through it. The forensic examination revealed several crucial details about the manner of death. The victim had been shot 3 times in the chest with a .45 caliber handgun. One particularly significant piece of evidence was a dime that had been struck by one of the bullets and driven into the victim's body, along with fabric from clothing. This evidence clearly indicated that the victim had been dressed at the time of the shooting despite being found nude. There was also no evidence supporting sexual assault. The killer's attempt to destroy evidence through the use of lime actually worked against their intentions. The perpetrator had covered the body with quicklime, apparently believing it would accelerate decomposition and eliminate forensic evidence. However, the wrong type of lime was used, and when combined with moisture from the river environment, it actually helped preserve the body in a near mummified state. This preservation proved crucial for maintaining viable DNA samples and other forensic evidence that would eventually lead to the victim's identification. Evidence indicated that the shooter was facing the victim and was likely walking or running toward her when the shots were fired. The victim's arms were found stretched above her head, suggesting she had been dragged to her final location on the riverbank. This evidence pointed to the murder occurring at a different location, with the body subsequently transported and dumped by the river. Investigators developed several theories about the circumstances surrounding the murder. One possibility that gained traction was the potential connection to local biker gangs. The .45 caliber firearm used in the murder was particularly popular among biker gangs during that time period, and there was speculation that the victim may have been at a biker bar in Jones, Oklahoma, before her murder. However, this theory, like many others pursued during the initial investigation, ultimately failed to produce concrete leads or suspects. As months turned to years without identification, the victim became known throughout Oklahoma and beyond as the Lime Lady. The case file grew over the decades as investigators followed up on missing person reports, compared dental records, and pursued various tips and leads from the public. However, the limitations of forensic technology and the passage of time made traditional identification methods increasingly unlikely to succeed. In September 2018, Captain Bob Green made a decision that would ultimately crack the case. Recognizing the potential of emerging DNA genealogy techniques, he contacted the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit organization that uses volunteer genealogists and advanced DNA analysis to identify unknown victims. The DNA extraction process took about 9 months to complete. However, once this was over, volunteers quickly identified the woman. In December 2019, they were able to obtain dental records from the United States Army, where the victim had served as a specialist. The dental record comparison provided definitive confirmation of the identification as Tamara Lee Tygard. Tamara was born on April 18, 1959, in Alameda, California, to James and Patty Tygard. She had one sister and, by all accounts, grew up in a typical American family. Tragically, her parents and sister had all passed away by the time of her identification, meaning they never learned what had happened to their daughter and sister. On February 24, 1979, she married Chadwick Ryan Carr in Las Vegas, Nevada, though the marriage was brief and they divorced within months. At the time of her disappearance, Tamara was living in Las Vegas, Nevada. She was reported missing in March 1980 after she left her home for a walk and never returned. The simplicity of her disappearance added to the mystery of how she ended up in Oklahoma approximately a month later. One of the most puzzling aspects of the case was the discovery that another woman in Ohio had been using her identity around the time of her disappearance. This identity theft actually caused Tamara's missing person report to be cleared from the system, as authorities believed that she was alive and well in Ohio. Captain Green has stated that while investigators have a photograph of the Ohio woman, they have never been able to identify her. The relationship between this identity theft and Tamara's murder remains unclear, though investigators have not ruled out a connection. In 2019, it was also found that she has several cousins who lived in Oregon. While Tamara's identification brought closure to one aspect of the case, her murder remains unsolved. The Oklahoma County Sheriff's Office continues to investigate the case, hoping that the identification might generate new leads or encourage witnesses to come forward. No suspects have been arrested, and the investigation remains active. Amy Billig was born on January 9, 1957, in Oyster Bay, New York, to Nathaniel and Susan Billig. She was the first of two children, followed by her younger brother, Joshua, born on February 14, 1958. Amy's birth was particularly meaningful to her parents, as Susan had suffered 4 miscarriages before successfully carrying Amy to term. The family was said to be firmly placed in the middle class. Nathaniel owned an art gallery while Susan worked as an interior designer and art dealer. Susan later described Amy as a sociable, spiritual teenager who was very much into nature. She played both flute and guitar, wrote poetry, and read extensively. She also worked as a dolphin trainer at the Miami Sea Aquarium. In May 1969, concerned about rising crime levels in New York City, the Billig family relocated to Coconut Grove, Florida. Nathaniel opened a new art gallery, and both children attended local private schools. At the time of her disappearance, Amy was 17 years old, standing 5 inches tall and weighing about 100 to 110 pounds. She had wavy mid-brown hair that reached her waist, brown eyes, and a distinctive 2-inch appendectomy scar on her abdomen. Some rumors also mentioned that she could have had a secret tattoo. By March 1974, Amy was nearing graduation from Adelphi Academy of Coral Gables, scheduled for March 31st. She was considering pursuing a career in acting following her graduation. Like many teenagers of the era, she frequently hitchhiked around her neighborhood, though never for considerable distances. On March 5, 1974, Amy returned home from school in the early afternoon, ate a yogurt, and then called her father at his gallery. She asked to borrow $2 to pay for lunch with friends at nearby Peacock Park. Her father readily agreed. Amy changed from her school clothes into a blue denim mini-skirt and sandals before leaving home. She hitchhiked the short distance to the gallery on Commodore Plaza, less than 1 mile away. Construction workers observed Amy hitchhiking at the corner of Poinciana Street and Main Highway in Coconut Grove in the early afternoon. This sighting would turn out to be the last confirmed observation of Amy. She never arrived at her father's gallery and never met her friends for lunch. When she failed to return home that evening, her mother Susan and brother Joshua became increasingly concerned. The worry escalated when Amy's friends called the Billig residence, asking why she had not shown up for their planned lunch. When Nathaniel returned home and confirmed that Amy had never arrived at his gallery, panic set in. Susan's initial call to the Miami Police Department was met with a frustratingly casual response. Detective Michael Gonzalez told her, "Don't panic. Call back if Amy isn't home by morning." By 6:00 a.m. On March 6th, Susan made her second call to the police. This time, an official investigation was launched, marking the beginning of what would become one of Florida's longest-running missing person cases. The only piece of physical evidence in Amy's case was discovered 13 days after her disappearance. On March 18th, a hitchhiking college student found Amy's Instamatic camera in grass beside the Wildwood exit on Florida's Turnpike, approximately 250 miles northwest of Miami. The camera's location was of particular interest because it would have been on the route that motorcycle gangs typically took when traveling north from South Florida. However, it remained unclear whether Amy had the camera with her when she disappeared or if it had gone missing earlier. When the film was developed, the results were largely disappointing. Most photographs were completely overexposed and yielded no useful information. However, two images provided intriguing clues. One showed a light-colored pickup truck parked in front of a vine-covered building wall, and another depicted a white van. Despite extensive efforts, investigators were never able to locate either vehicle or identify the building. 16 days after the disappearance, Amy's family received what appeared to be their first break in the case. A phone call claiming that Amy had been kidnapped and was being held for a $30,000 ransom. The caller even played what Susan believed to be her daughter's voice, calling out for her mom to help her. Desperate to secure her daughter's return, Susan borrowed the substantial sum from friends. A rendezvous was arranged at the Fontina Hotel on March 22nd, where Susan was to deliver the money in a black case. However, Susan wanted proof that the caller actually had Amy before she handed over the cash. Turned out the perpetrators were 16-year-old twin brothers Charles and Lawrence Glasser, who had no connection to Amy's disappearance whatsoever. Both were arrested and charged with extortion, to which they pleaded guilty. The incident left Susan emotionally devastated. Addressing the media afterward, she pleaded, "Please, no more prank calls like that one. I would have done anything to get Amy back, begged, borrowed, or stolen." From early in the investigation, both police and the Billig family received multiple tips suggesting that Amy had been abducted by members of a motorcycle gang. Two rival gangs, the Outlaws and the Pagans Motorcycle Clubs, had both traveled through the Coconut Grove area on March 5, 1974, en route to an annual bike festival in Daytona. Both organizations were known for violence and abuse against women, including abduction and sex trafficking. The timing of their presence in the area made them immediate suspects in Amy's disappearance. On March 16th, just 11 days after Amy vanished, a caller identifying herself as Susan Johnson claimed that Amy had been abducted by the Outlaws. Shortly thereafter, a family friend informed the Billigs that he had heard from a lawyer who had previously represented the gang about rumors of a teenage girl recently, quote, taken from Miami. Susan, desperate for any lead, arranged through this lawyer for two Outlaws members to visit the Billig household. One assured her that if Amy was, quote, in the Outlaw Nation, we'll return her. However, days later, the same individuals called Susan, advising her to simply, quote, forget the whole thing. One of the most significant developments came in January 1976, when a gang member named David personally contacted Susan, claiming to have recognized Amy from newspaper photographs as a girl he had previously owned. This individual provided crucial credibility to his claims by describing Amy's distinctive appendectomy scar, which was information that had never been disclosed to the media at the time. David agreed to meet with the family at their home, where he described Amy as having been extremely timid, submissive, and quiet like a mute while in his company. He claimed he could contact the individual who currently had Amy and agreed to help reunite mother and daughter. Several weeks later, David contacted the Billigs to inform them that Amy was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A meeting was arranged at a Tulsa tavern where David claimed Amy would be returned to her mother. However, the plan went disastrously wrong when a fight erupted between David and other gang members, resulting in David being injured. Another gang member quickly ushered Susan into a taxi for her safety. Approximately 5 weeks later, David contacted Susan one final time. He informed her that his kneecaps had reportedly been broken in retaliation for being an informant, and that Amy was now in Seattle working as an erotic dancer. He warned Susan this would be their last contact. Despite traveling to Seattle to pursue this lead, Susan found no trace of her daughter. Perhaps the most devastating aspect of the entire case was the sustained harassment campaign that began shortly after Amy's disappearance. An unknown male caller who identified himself as Johnson began making regular phone calls to the Billig household, specifically targeting Amy's mother. These calls were not random pranks, but a systematic campaign of psychological torture. The caller would graphically describe alleged abuse he claimed to be inflicting on Amy, stating that she had been abducted by members of an organized sex ring and was being held captive. He threatened that Susan would suffer the same fate. The content of these calls was extraordinarily cruel. The caller would tell Susan things like, "I've cut out Amy's tongue, and Amy will be sold off at a livestock auction." In one particularly sadistic call, Susan was told that her daughter had only 2 weeks left to live. The psychological impact on Susan was severe, causing sleep deprivation, nausea, and seizures. When she was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1992, she even shared this information with the caller, hoping it might reach his conscience and he would either cease the harassment or, if he were indeed Amy's abductor, release her daughter. Instead, the caller just used this information in his threats and taunts. The harassment continued for an astounding 21 years, from 1974 to 1995. On 2 occasions, the caller even agreed to meet with Susan at proposed rendezvous points, though he failed to appear both times. Despite the toll, Susan endured these calls because she held on to the hope they might eventually lead to information about Amy's whereabouts. The breakthrough in identifying the harassing caller came in October 1995 when FBI agents successfully traced a call made from a cell phone. The caller was identified as Henry Johnson Blair, a 48-year-old married father of 2 daughters who had worked for the United States Customs Service for 24 years with a distinguished record. Blair's identification shocked those who knew him. Colleagues described him as a model citizen whose only vice was late afternoon candy bars. He was known as Hank to his friends and was described as, quote, "one of the most down-to-earth, commonsensical, likable people you would ever meet." Blair had even achieved professional recognition, helping to recover a 1636 painting by Peter Paul Rubens that had been stolen from a Spanish museum, earning him Spain's highest civilian honor. He was arrested and formally charged with 3 counts of aggravated stalking and released on a $75,000 bond to await trial. At trial, he pleaded not guilty, but was convicted on March 6, 1996, of 2 counts of stalking and sentenced to 2 years in prison. During the trial, Blair admitted to obtaining pleasure from making the calls, but claimed he had not intended to cause distress. He insisted he was an alcoholic with obsessive-compulsive disorder, and thus not responsible for his actions. He maintained that he had never met Amy and knew nothing about her actual disappearance. Susan expressed bewilderment at Blair's motivation, stating, "I just don't understand why he pinpointed me and Amy. There has to be a reason." She later settled a $5 million lawsuit against Blair, noting that he had never apologized for his harassment. Blair's identification added a new dimension to the case due to several intriguing coincidences. 6 weeks before her disappearance, Amy had written in her journal about a man she called Hank, who had asked her to accompany him to South America, though she had told him he is crazy. Blair's nickname was indeed Hank. Additionally, Blair owned a white van that strongly resembled one depicted in a photograph developed from Amy's camera. His job with the Customs Service also required him to temporarily relocate to South America, around the time Amy had specified in her journal entry. These coincidences led some to theorize that Blair may have been more involved in Amy's disappearance than initially believed. However, this theory remained unproven. Investigators found no concrete evidence linking Blair to Amy's actual disappearance beyond the harassment campaign. The connection remains speculative, based primarily on circumstantial coincidences rather than solid evidence. The most significant development in understanding Amy's likely fate came in December 1997 with the deathbed confession of Paul Branch, a high-ranking former member of the Pagans motorcycle gang. Branch, who was dying in Charlottesville, Virginia, chose to confess to his wife the details of Amy's abduction and murder. According to Branch, Amy had been abducted and taken to a party in the Everglades where the pagans operated a trailer clubhouse. Branch claimed that Amy had insulted some gang members. As punishment, she was ganged by approximately 24 gang members. The confession detailed how Amy fought back during the assault, leading her attackers to repeatedly inject her with substances to subdue her. Eventually, she was given so much that she overdosed and died within hours of being taken to the trailer clubhouse. Her body was then hastily disposed of in the swamp. Lead Detective Jack Calvar found Branch's confession credible, stating that numerous details matched known facts of the case, some of which had never been publicly disclosed. However, he added a sobering caveat: "We will never find a body." Branch had been repeatedly questioned by investigators over the years following the disappearance, but had always denied any knowledge of her whereabouts. He had even personally spoken with Amy's parents during their search efforts. His confession named one individual he alleged participated in Amy's abuse and murder, a person who had been incarcerated for murder since May 1974. When interviewed, this individual denied any involvement. Some investigators have expressed skepticism about the confession. Authorities noted concerns that Branch's widow may have been lying about the deathbed confession in an effort to financially profit from Amy's disappearance. However, the specific details that matched unpublicized case facts gave the confession significant credibility. After 24 years of searching, Susan finally accepted that Amy was dead. On March 8, 1998, she held a private memorial service at her Coconut Grove home, inviting friends and acquaintances who had assisted in the search. Susan reported obtaining a tremendous sense of peace from the ceremony. Former Miami Herald reporter Edna Buchanan, who attended the service, said the following: "Susan has been through more than any other mother I've ever met in all those years of covering missing children and homicides. She looks happier and more relieved than I've seen her look in the last 24 years. Susan told attendees they would now attempt to laugh and be merry because Amy would have wanted us to. However, she maintained that if Amy's killers were ever found, the peace she felt might be pushed aside, admitting, 'I don't know what I do. I don't think I could control myself at this point.'" Psti Tsu. The case took a devastating toll on the Billig family. Nathaniel died of lung cancer in 1993, with his final words expressing his desire to see his daughter before his death. Susan continued searching alone, battling her own lung cancer diagnosis while maintaining hope for Amy's return. Susan died of a heart attack on June 7, 2005, at the age of 80, having searched for her daughter for over 31 years. Before her death, she asked Amy's brother Joshua to never give up the search for his sister. 2 days after Susan's death, Joshua reflected on the lifelong impact of Amy's disappearance. "I don't think my mother ever found true peace. She took that as a really tough wound right to the grave." Joshua, now a successful stonemason in Miami, continues to honor his mother's dying wish by maintaining a Facebook page called Find Amy Billig. If you have information that could help, contact the relevant authorities and leave a tip below. For more cases like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe. This is Criminologist signing off.